Welcome to today's webinar. Our topic today is transitioning to a smarter fleet. Before we get started, I'd like to take a moment to get over a few housekeeping items. My name is Andrew Smizer. I am the Director of Energy Services with the Greater Cleveland Partnership, and I will be moderating today's webinar. We want to make sure today's presentation is extremely valuable for you, so we ask that you submit all questions by clicking on the question button in the control panel and typing your question. We welcome questions throughout, so please do submit your questions during the presentation. Today's presentation is being recorded and will be distributed to all registrants. Now on to our topic, transitioning to a smarter fleet. Owning a vehicle fleet is a necessary investment for many organizations, from small cars that can be used by staff to get to appointments and sale calls, to large commercial delivery vehicles and everything in between. Your fleet allows you the work to get done. The process and cost of transitioning to EV may seem overwhelming, but there are probably benefits to this change that you may be missing. A smarter fleet that incorporates the charging infrastructure can help you get the most of your investment, from improving convenience and reliability of the fleet to generating revenue by making chargers available to the public or employees during the day when your vehicles are on the road. Many options exist, and today we'll hear from 4 experts who will provide more information about why and how to electrify your fleet. Now let me introduce you to our speakers. Andrew Connolly from Clean Fuels, Ohio, Kevin Johnson from NextGen Interactive, Jimmy Smith from ChargePoint, and Michael Peters from Sway Mobility. And now to get started with talking about why the transition to EVs is Andrew Connolly from Clean Fuels, Ohio.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew, and thanks to the Greater Cleveland Partnership for hosting this event. So I'm going to touch base briefly on why EVs and some of the how around the operations side. So just before diving into that, Clean Fuels Ohio, we are a 501c3 nonprofit exclusively focused on a mission of improving the efficiency and sustainability of the transportation sector. We work across all commercially available efficiency technologies and alternative fuels. We have a Drive Electric Ohio program focused exclusively on EVs that's really designed to do grassroots consumer education, to educate local, state, and federal policymakers, to engage utilities and the electricity providers, to work with fleets like we're doing today, to help with infrastructure planning in communities and key corridors, and to engage dealers and manufacturers. And weaving throughout all those 6 areas is also our goals around ensuring equity and access. So this is our EV specific program. Brendan Kelly is the director of that program, and we really encourage you to connect with us around any of those beyond just the fleet topic today if you have interest. But that said, I want to talk about why EVs. So what we see here is a chart that's really showing projections around the battery technology. And the real key takeaway here, you see Bloomberg, there's other analysis, McKinsey. There's a number of analyses on when the key tipping point in battery technology is going to hit. Really, the key item to focus in on is this $100 per kilowatt. Right now, batteries are the largest portion of the cost of EVs. But basically, over this decade, sometime between the 24 to 26, 2024 to 2026 range, most of the analysis project that EVs will reach price parity with internal combustion engines, so that you'll have the range and performance and the price parity there. And so because of that, there's a lot of interest and investment in electric vehicles. Just in the next couple years here, we're going to see a wide range of vehicles added to the market. Right now we have lots of sedans. We're going to see a lot more SUVs enter the market, a lot more trucks and vans like pickup trucks, utility vans, and things like that, as well as we're seeing an increasing number of vocational units. We've got Amazon announcing a number of Class 6 box truck purchases and other things coming into the market. And so the investments that we see, you know, from GM and Lordstown, Ohio, from the major manufacturers, they all see the writing on the wall. They are all investing significantly in production. Because of these key factors, most of these independent analysis puts something towards the end of this decade of in the neighborhood of 25% of new vehicle purchases being electrified. So what I'm trying to do is just highlight on the why side that really there's major investments coming, a range of products coming, lower cost, better performance coming, and real onset of these in the market over the next decade. So that's really the why. This is how the market is moving. In terms of the how, Clean Fuels Ohio and other partners on this call do a good job in working with fleets on analysis and planning. And so what I'm going to key into here is what are some of the key factors specific to electric vehicles that you really need to focus in on to make sure they work for your operations. And then some of our other panelists here will go into how you can make sure they work for financial costs and management. So really understanding your operations and the key goals and options available to you are the few of the first steps here. So how does that look in terms of EVs? Well, first you want to look at what are you doing now. This is actual real data from a fleet we worked with last year who was using Honda CRVs and looking at could we use a battery electric sedan in their place. And so whenever we work with the fleet around EVs, we first want to establish that it's going to be an operational win. To do that, you really need to understand the average miles per day and the maximum miles per day. You really need to get to will an EV provide enough range for the drive and duty cycle of that vehicle, and what are any outliers that might be there. So this is just a sample of some data, but it showed that, on average, this fleet was going somewhere between 40 and 50 miles a day, sometimes as much as 90 miles a day, but in a couple of rare outliers going 137 to over 200 miles a day. That really affects what size battery pack you'd need and what vehicle options might best serve your operations. In addition to that, you really need to look at any other power draws on that vehicle, because now you're moving from petroleum fuels to battery. Is there anything else drawing power off that vehicle? Idling is a key factor. Is that vehicle, like a city meter reader or a corporate sales vehicle that's going to kind of idle outside a location as it's filling out paperwork before and after a sales visit or something like that? Additionally, is there peripheral equipment? Are there communications on that vehicle, like radios? Are there computers on that vehicle that need to be powered? Are there additional parameters? Really trying to get at, with max daily miles and other power draws, how much energy is going to be used each day, so you can spec the size of the battery pack of whatever vehicle you're targeting to your operational parameters. With that, you can really run the numbers and figure out, hey, something like a 40 kilowatt hour Nissan Leaf or, whatever vehicle you identify, actually, that smaller battery pack would work for us. We would use, something like 80% of that battery pack in the max daily use case of a vehicle. You're really trying to get your parameters right to make sure that you're not going to run out of battery on any of your routes. So having at least a quarter of that battery left is probably a good practice to never exceed more than 3/4 of your max battery usage. But you can really get into the weeds on this and chart out how big of a battery you need, since those are a large part of the cost of an electric vehicle. Limiting how much battery you need really limits the upfront CapEx cost you're going to need to invest in an EV. In this case, for this fleet we worked with, they didn't actually need the SUV for its service cycle and operations, is just kind of what they had been using. So they could easily do the same service in a sedan, and they ended up saving something like $6,000 between the MSRP of a Nissan Leaf versus a CRV compact SUV. So it's not going to work out in every case that you can save even CapEx in an EV, but as we get further and further into this decade, as battery prices come down, as range increases, we're going to see more and more cases where you're going to save money, not just on the operational cost per mile, which some of our next panelists will get into, but even potentially on the front end purchase price, depending on what you're deploying and how. So with that, ChargePoint and Jimmy Smith, they're going to get into this a little bit more. Once you know it'll work for your max daily power draw, you need to double check the other side of that coin. Is it going to work? Do you have enough time for it to charge? So this isn't charging right now. You can get really fast chargers that are expensive, but don't take much time to charge your vehicle. Or if you have more time, you can really limit the cost you're investing in charging with either a 110 volt or 208, 240 volt level 2 charger, depending on how much time you have to dwell at overnight or between routes with that vehicle. So really understanding that, what's the max power draw and range, and what is the max time you have to charge, will really help you establish what is best for your operations, both in terms of vehicle and charging technology. So those are some of the key initial considerations in making sure the how is right for your operations. And I've illustrated this with Nissan Leaf, but there's certainly many other vehicles in the marketplace that can work for fleets. With that, I just wanted to mention, we hosted a virtual conference in September that had many sessions that dove further into the weeds on electric vehicles. Actually, you can register for free, and all of the content is still housed online. And there was 10 sessions specific to electric vehicles where you hear from corporate fleets, hear from a number of other partners on why, how, and what they've done to deploy these. So with that, that is just a little bit on the why and how for my piece, and I'll turn it back over for our next panelists. Thanks.
So Andrew, thank you so much for kicking this off. I'm going to start with a presentation that talks about the costs associated with doing this from a fleet perspective. And I thought, your comments were really a nice lead in to kind of what I want to talk about. So first of all, my name again is Kevin Johnson. I am the managing partner of NextGen Interactive. We are a management consultancy. We focus on basically digital transformation and the development and the marketing of the technologies that are fourth IR or fourth industrial revolution technologies, inclusive of things like electric vehicles and autonomous vehicles. So this is a space that we're in. We also do installation, spec and installation of EV charging stations and the like. So I'm very happy to be on this call and just give you a perspective of what a fleet owner might be thinking about as he goes through this. What I'm going to talk about essentially is two areas. So if you're a fleet operator, why do you want to do this? Why would you consider it? What's the driver for you to change from what you're doing to perhaps something else? And it always comes down to one thing: total cost of ownership, total cost of operation. So I've got a slide where I've condensed a lot of information because I didn't want to be slide heavy. And we'll walk through that. And then I thought I'd do kind of a typical transition and have a look at what that might look like. And for that, I've used an example. We see a lot of cars or a lot of automobiles, but I thought it would be interesting to step up in size to light truck and see what that looks like, because a lot of our fleets, as you probably know from looking at Amazon everywhere as they drive around doing their deliveries, are anything from panel vans all the way up to Class 8 vehicles. So that's what I want to talk about in just a few slides and kind of give you a feel for the costs. First of all, the why. So this is a chart where I've combined an awful lot, but when you really look at it, for a fleet operator, you're looking at a vehicle cost, and this formula is probably pretty succinct. You're looking at the initial purchase price plus the price for fuel plus the maintenance costs. That's really what it comes down to, right? So I've got about 8 parameters on this that compares EVs, electric vehicles, and I want to be clear, I'm not talking about hybrids or any of those types of things, pure electric vehicles with internal combustion engine vehicles or the traditional automobile. So ICE, of course, is internal combustion engine. So just a few parameters that a fleet operator is going to be thinking about. First of all, fuel costs. Average fuel costs, and this is on the automobile side, let's say it's between, for an EV, $50 to $80 a month versus quite a bit more, 2.5 times more, 3 times more, depending upon what you're doing with an internal combustion engine. That data comes from the U.S. Department of Energy. One of the other
Kevin,
things yes.
Can you make put your presentation in presentation mode so we can see that slide a little bit bigger? The numbers are pretty small since we see both this slide and the next one.
Interesting, because I am in presentation mode on mine. Give me just a second and let's see what we can do. Ah, okay. Of course, this means when I get this set, I'm looking at 2 screens. One screen is perfect and the other screen is not. So I'm going to try to remedy that situation right now. Give me just a second and we'll see if we can get there.
I believe if you click the display settings at the top, you can switch which screen they display onto if you have a dual monitor.
This means that whenever I get this set, I'll just have to talk faster. All right, so you're still seeing my screen, but it's still smaller, yes?
Yes.
I think the problem may be because I'm projecting on another screen on my system, it's not going up to yours properly. So I do apologize. Well, I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to do this. And then we're going to try to do this. And then we're going to try to change the view that we're looking at from our PowerPoint. And see if we can make this adjustment. No. All right, well, we don't have.
That's all right. You can just keep going. It's okay. We'll manage.
Let me keep going. I've taken it off of a dual screen thinking that that would help, but it doesn't seem as though that's the way. Did it get any larger?
Yes.
Good. All right, well, slight progress. Let's keep going. So look, what we have is just a comparison of about eight components or 8 parameters. Maybe the most important one is the second one. When you start looking at the total number of engine components in what is engine components, meaning moving parts, in what is an electric vehicle versus an internal combustion engine or an automobile that runs on gasoline. And so what you're really looking at here is the fact that you have a significant reduction in parts, which means a significant reductions in things that can go wrong and cost you repair, cost you downtime, cost you those types of things that make it very difficult for you to run your fleet. So that's a huge one. Vehicle safety is big if you're looking at the fact that lithium ion batteries are typically much less combustible than obviously gasoline. Maintenance costs, the average that we're looking at in the industry right now is that EVs are approximately 30% the maintenance cost of internal combustion engines. Driving range is an issue, okay? So if you look at driving range, I'm gonna go back to battery life in just a second. Driving range is about 200 to 300 miles for electric vehicles. All of this is dependent, of course, on battery size and the vehicle that you're using. The battery life is an interesting thing because it has been a bugaboo in the industry initially, but at the end of the day, all of our studies show that battery life, depending upon if you're taking good care of it, is about 400 to 500,000 miles. Well, that speaks pretty well to a fleet and fleet usage. I did make a note here that new batteries, depending upon, again, the vehicle, are around $5,000, and that's in today's prices. But what's happening is that over time, and Andrew pointed this out in his earlier comments, these prices are coming down, and they're coming down drastically because there's so much money that's being put into EVs because of the savings associated with all of these parameters that I'm showing here. Energy efficiency. A study from Stanford has come out, and they used a Tesla 85 kilowatt engine, and what they came up with is about a 4-time advantage in energy efficiency. So basically about 20.2 gigajoules per year for this particular Tesla model versus an automobile, versus a gas-powered automobile, a traditional automobile, an internal combustion engine. And then, of course, big fleets are beginning to turn the corner with respect to even the environment. And the fact that EVs have no emissions help fleet operators with respect to how they are viewed and maybe the things that they actually care about as well. So this isn't just a PR thing. This is something that might be important to a lot of operators, is the improved air qualities in the environment with which they operate. So I will put this slide together again because it is the economics associated with electric vehicles that are turning the corner, turning fleet operators to take a look at this and saying, you know, I really need to consider this. Quite frankly, I really need to do it. All right, let's see if we can get to the next slide. All right, so what I want to talk about now is you know, rather than talking about pass car, I thought I'd talk about a commercial fleet van, because this is what you're going to begin to see a lot of on the road. What I'm showing here is something called a Ford Transit. This is a vehicle that is used by so many tradesmen and so many small or mid-sized fleets. This is a vehicle that might be used by Amazon, by Roto-Rooter, by your plumbers, your electricians. You know, those are folks that are using this size fleet, this size vehicle in their fleet. And so it's a really good type of vehicle to take a look at. Generally speaking, McKinsey's study says that on average, these types of vehicles are being used about 50 miles per day. And you saw that with Andrew and our last presenter. And also, fleets are employing their own charging stations. So what they're doing is the charging stations have their own software, and they're able to do one of two things. They're able to either charge these fleets using level 2 chargers, which Jimmy is going to talk about next. They're able to do that overnight, or they're able to do them in a programmed fashion such that the system or the environment or the network is able to keep up with what the charge is on each one of the vehicles and make sure that they're not going to be in a situation where they are going to be running out of energy. Now, again, to Andrew's conversation before, your study up front helps you understand exactly where you're at with respect to mileage and energy and what you can expect to use on a regular basis. That's something, as he said, you're going to want to do before you make this decision. But again, the reasons why. Let's take a look at what a conversion actually looks like. So on one of these Ford Transits, you're looking at a couple of different kits that are provided. There's a 60-mile kit option and a 120-mile kit option. And you can see the retail prices for both of those, about a $20,000 spread. So if you take a look at the fact that the vehicle itself costs about $40,000, you can kind of see the type of cost you're talking about in today's dollars. If it's a 60-mile kit, if that's the type of service that you're running and you're comfortable with that, that's about a $120,000 investment, up to a $140,000 investment if you're doing about 120 miles per vehicle in your fleet. Now, if you take a look at that, there are some offsets that are available that make it easier to get into that today. Number one, operational savings. You've got fuel costs and maintenance costs. Remember that equation that I showed earlier. Your fuel costs are significantly lower. Your maintenance costs are tremendously lower. And then you've got a number of things that are taking place depending upon the state that you're in. There are grant and carbon credit funds that are available that are generally greater than about $5 billion. And it just depends on the state you're in and what you're able to apply for based on your geography. More and more fleets now are looking at not necessarily buying these vehicles and converting them or buying them already converted. They're actually looking at leasing them. And so the forecasts are suggesting that an awful lot of fleets are actually going to be using that methodology in order to move into e-vehicles and do it quickly and do it relatively cost effectively. This last slide that I want to talk to talks about a little bit more downtime and maintenance. And these are things that fleet operators are really focused on. They want their fleets on the road. They don't want them to be dealing with service. Generally speaking, for an internal combustion engine van that averages about 25K per year, it's going to do about 5 oil changes and about 2 brake changes. The brake changes could be more, just depends upon the driver and the conditions and the such. But when you look at it, when you convert to your EV, you begin to minimize the days of downtime per year. You don't have to deal with oil changes. Your braking and your brakes probably have a 1.5 to 2 times life because of something called regenerative braking, which is a process in an electric vehicle whereby you begin to slow down without actually using your brakes. And the engine actually goes into reverse, moves energy from kinetic energy into potential energy right back into the battery, helps you with your battery life, and helps you with the strain that's on your brakes. You've got significantly reduced labor costs, and this is one of the double-edged swords associated with fourth industrial revolution technologies. You're going to have lesser of a need for skilled mechanics to do certain things. You know, in an internal combustion engine, there's a lot going on in those vehicles that have to have a combination of what I call science and art to make them work and run. And in a fleet where they are oftentimes used in maybe a more rugged fashion, that mechanic and the cost of that mechanic is something that the operator, the fleet operator, has to deal with. So in an EV world, that's a shift in cost and a shift in labor. Fleet drivers do not need to refuel during the day, and operators are really less dependent upon the volatility with respect to oil, with respect to therefore gasoline and diesel prices. So again, there's that equation. Vehicle costs equal initial purchase price plus the price for fuel plus maintenance costs. What we're seeing, of course, is that the maintenance costs with EVs significantly less. The price for fuel significantly less. And what you're going to see is that the initial purchase price, if you decide to purchase these or lease them, quite frankly, is coming down really, really fast. So to Andrew's conversation earlier, by the time we get to the midpoint of this decade, you've got parity with internal combustion engines, and you're going to be in a situation where these vehicles, electric vehicles, are going to be unstoppable. And so that's why you're seeing a move by the automakers globally to this type of technology. So that's kind of a quick overview of costs and conversion prices, front-ended by why a fleet operator would want to do it. So with that, you've got my contact information on the screen, and let us move on to, I think Jimmy's our next speaker.
I think you're on mute, Jimmy.
Appreciate that. Yeah, and hopefully you can see the right screen here now. So big orange one, and then can hear me at this point.
Yep, we're all good.
Most excellent. So, yep, Jimmy Smith. I work for ChargePoint. Just a quick overview of what we are. I'm here in Columbus, Ohio, but we're based in San Jose, California. We only work on EV charging stations. We have more than 700 employees globally, with HQ in California, offices in Scottsdale, Arizona, as well as across Europe in Paris, Munich, Amsterdam, and in the UK. So our goal is our vision is to move people and goods on electric power, and however and wherever that might be. That's how that's what we can strive for, to be able to get that in. So we see fleets as they have to be mission critical fueling. So we want to make sure that we're empowering fleets to be able to manage this new fueling paradigm, that with the cost, and maximize the efficiencies that naturally come with the electric vehicle. So we have the tools and the experience to make sure that you scale with this new fueling so that it doesn't disrupt how you already run your operations. So a part of, as the title of this presentation for this webinar is about, how to transition to the smart fueling network, or smart fueling paradigm. So with network charging, this is really we also call it smart charging stations, and how the fleets would fuel. So you can save on CapEx and OpEx, as we heard before this, on not only the vehicles themselves, but also on how that fuel was come in. So fuel that's coming from your grid is much more reliable as far as the cost over time. It doesn't change nearly as much or as volatile as the gas fuels do. But also there's another factor to play in there, and that's how you manage that power when it's charging. So not only is it important to, as you're switching, to understand those costs of electricity, but your costs could change by the time of day. So managing charging to charge after hours and off peak, or how much is charging at one time, can also play an important role, which can be utilized via the smart charging features of a charging station. So with smart charging, you also get programming to do access control, understanding, like a reporting that comes in with like how many sessions, or who is using it and how often, as well as getting alerts to make sure that your infrastructure is up and running, just as your vehicles need to be for this, what we call mission critical functions of running the fleet, so that you're fully charged for the next day, so your fleet can operate as it's determined to. So with that, we were network connected via, either Wi-Fi or cell, and then also we do 24/7 driver support to make it easy for people that, if they have questions in this new fueling, they can call somebody, get quick answers, and find out the information they need to, and then support for the stations themselves. Also with smart charging, you may have the ability to potentially charge your fleet off hours, and then during the day it could be used for maybe a public location. There's actually a couple of municipalities around me in Columbus that use their fleet during the day. The chargers are open at like maybe a city hall location, and then they come back in the evening, they can plug in to get that full charge overnight. Another example of what smart charging can help with the cost of your fuel is that you may not necessarily need to charge it at the fastest rate possible all the time. So here's an example of like managing that power. When the first vehicle shows up, it can get that full amount of power. You know, this is happened to be like a yard tractor for moving, you know, trailers around in a shipping depot. And then as that second vehicle comes up, it can plug in too, and then it like shares that power back and forth. And as you can see, when you get to that, you know, 120-minute time frame there, all the power is then shifted over because the first vehicle has been charged. It goes over to the second vehicle to get that full charge. So that way you can share that power. They both be able to charge a little bit longer amount of time, but you know, this is only a 2-hour dwell time. That's easily like an overnight charge, where the vehicle can get the power they need throughout the charging session, but also not have to you know, double the infrastructure for, you know, having 2 vehicles. So talking a little bit on the hardware side of it. So you know, ChargePoint is the only one in the market that has a full suite of products from a home, multifamily, fleet, public mixed use, and 4 different types of DC fast chargers. You can see we range in power between just a 7 kilowatt all the way up to a 500 kilowatt charger. It just depends on, you know, finding that right product solution for the use case that the fleets are using. Most often, because right now the vehicles, as Andrew had pointed out, the vehicles are mostly light duty vehicles. So you're usually talking about an AC depot charger where people plug in their vehicle overnight and get that charge. Depending on the use case of that, I was working with the Transit Authority in Kentucky, where they do run some considerably longer routes every once in a while. So they did a blend of a AC level 2 station, and then also had a DC fast charger that was available on site, so that for, you know, that onesie twosie operational need where they need to have that quick charge before heading back out to to finish one of the routes, they had that on site available to them. So it really is determining, you know, the use case of that fleet that, you know, our other experts on this call have already told and already had kind of talked about, but then choosing that right hardware to fit what that use case is. And then making sure that you have like the right quality for the products that you end up choosing, to make sure that they're going to be, you know, out there, have that uptime that you're going to need to make sure that, you know, this critical infrastructure for your fleets are there running and, you know, available for the next shift that the car is going to be needed. Another consideration is that integrating with preferred providers. So, you know, with a ChargePoint station, since they are smart charging, you're already going to have a dashboard full of data that can help you manage your fleets appropriately, understanding, you know, who is charged, where they're at, you know, battery state of charge, you know, making sure that they're all fully charged by the next shift, and that there was no, you know, error with either they weren't plugged in, the operator forgot to leave them plugged in, or that there was an error with the charger. Perhaps the car had like a time delay onto it. You can all get that from our dashboard just off the bat. But also, since these are smart charging stations, you can integrate with your current fleet operations as you have already. So you may already have a, you know, Asset Works or a Geo tab that are connected to the your current vehicles and your fueling system. Well, I mean, the Geo tab to the vehicle itself, Asset Works to view and keep track of the vehicles that are in your fleets. Well, now this, you know, switching over to electric doesn't necessarily mean that it's, you know, you have to redo everything that you already have. There's integrations with these different partners in the industry, so that your new electric fuel fleet can then integrate with the operations that you have on site. So, you know, just another view of what we just talked about, but you know, on the upper right, as we talk, you know, utilities sometimes offer what we call like time of use charging, or, you know, they provide a better rate after hours. So understanding where those are, you can schedule your charging to when it's cheapest for you. Or if you have other equipment running, that you can schedule it for a time where that equipment won't be running, so you can charge your vehicle so that you can avoid demand charges. You know, knowing where the fleet profile is, you know, who's charged and how often, become important too, just to make sure that not only the vehicles you have, but if you plan on expanding, you have that data and understanding what vehicles, where they need to be, when they're charged, that type of stuff. It can all be, you know, viewable at one location so that you can then, you know, manage your fleet appropriately just as you do today. And here I'm just highlighting some of the other points of, you know, having a support mechanism behind your infrastructure to make sure that they're up and running, make sure that you have field personnel who can be dispatched, you know, quickly, so that if there was an issue, your equipment can be replaced or repaired. You know, the proactively monitoring through a smart charging network, so that, you know, technicians can make sure that your equipment, and they can proactively dispatch people for you. This can all be done with smart charging stations, makes it easier for you. I'm going to leave it on this slide for a second, but I did want to just mention some questions to consider. Let's see if I can if I do this right for you. There we go. But some things to consider is, like, you know, how big is your existing fleet? Where are you going to, you know, how many do you want to be going to in the future? Is this going to be a one depot or multi different depots? You know, do you already have a telematics system that you want to integrate with? Or are you, and then what vehicle are you looking at? And, you know, the time frame of receiving those vehicles. So these are all, like, important questions that you should consider when considering the whole package of whether and when you go to a fully electric fleet. So from here, I'll pass it off to our next presenter with Sway Mobility.
Thanks very much, Jimmy. Hopefully my screen's up there now. Hi, everyone. This is Michael Peters. I'm with Sway Mobility. We're based in Shaker Heights here locally. And today I wanted to share some of our experiences operating EV fleets in several Ohio cities. Oops. There we go. So what I'm going to talk about today is mostly based around telematics and efficiencies. So we're going to talk about OEM, or the actual vehicle manufacturer telematics that come in many vehicles today, especially EVs, and some third-party options. How we get very actionable insights out of that data that we derive out of the telematics. How we can monitor and impact driver behavior, how we get greater utilization out of the vehicles, because ultimately that is a cost savings. We'll talk a little bit about pool and fleet share, how this can be an employee attraction and retention tool, which is not often something that we think about with vehicle fleets. And on the efficiency side, how we can do share the vehicles without using keys or swapping keys, how that lets us reduce vehicle fleets, or reduce our fleet size, adding additional modes of mobility beyond just cars and trucks, which is something we're increasingly seeing, and then how that can impact employee resiliency. There we go. So I'm going to start by talking to you about some of the tools that we currently use on the OEM side. So on the vehicle manufacturer side, this is something from General Motors. So we predominantly use the Chevy Bolt, which is a fully electric 259-mile EV. And so this is something called Vehicle Insights, the subscription service from General Motors. So you don't need us or anyone else to do this. Basically, if you have an OnStar equipped vehicle since I think about 2015, you can use Vehicle Insights today. And so no matter whether it's an EV or not. And we found this to be an extremely beneficial tool. I'm going to just walk you through a couple of different screens to see some of the things that we look at quite frequently. So this tells us the range of the vehicle. So in this case, because it's an EV, we're at 47% state of charge on this vehicle, the mileage on the vehicle, tire pressure, which is something that can really impact efficiency in an EV, and diagnostics. So is anything going on with the car, anything that we need to be concerned about in terms of maintenance. It'll show us exactly where the car is, and you can put a geofence around it. So if this is a fleet vehicle that your employees or staff are driving, you can be notified when the vehicle leaves a certain radius, or kind of what's going on with it. So also a really interesting tool. And you can see the trips that are taken on the vehicle. So this is also something really interesting. Insurance companies obviously love this data, but it also impacts driver behavior. So we can see, did a driver have a hard braking incident, a hard acceleration incident? Did they exceed a set speed, or did they increase the posted speed limit by a certain amount? And so these are all interesting things that are very helpful. And GM is starting to roll out what they're calling in-vehicle coaching, which will actually have a voice in the car, a pre-recorded voice, but a voice in the car that will help drivers when they exceed some of these limits. We also use this in combination with third-party telematics providers. So this is one of the ones we use. Jimmy mentioned Geotab. So Geotab is another third-party telematics provider. We work with 3 other ones as well. So all really adding added functionality, and sometimes are used in combination with the OEM telematics. So for example, we use Vehicle Insights. We also use these third-party telematics. And one of the reasons we do that is because they allow for something that the industry is increasingly calling mobility as a service. And so really the ability to add vehicles from many different manufacturers and many different modes. So you see here, in addition to cars, there's also bicycles. We can add scooters, pretty much anything that connects to the internet. And that is, essentially what we focus on doing, which is helping clients figure out their mobility strategy. So for us, that can be everything from a turnkey installation where we provide the car, the insurance, and everything else, to just pieces of that. And so it can be anything from that software that just helps people manage a fleet, to including the insurance in that, to basically running an entire fleet for someone. A couple examples of how and why we do this. And this goes to the efficiencies as well. And so, for example, in pool vehicles, what we've seen is the ability to share vehicles, again, not having to use a key. So this is all contactless, which is increasingly important today. But so no one is managing a box full of keys. Basically, everything is done on an app. And so what we've seen is where, for example, you may have had different departments who all had their assigned vehicle. Now you can pool all those vehicles together and have a reduction in your fleet size. For sales and business development people or staff, this is an opportunity to provide a safe and insured vehicle as opposed to a private vehicle, which hopefully is safe and insured, but you never really know. And when you use electric vehicles, it's really a tangible commitment to your ESG and sustainability goals. So it really helps meet some of those metrics that some of the other panelists have talked about. On the delivery side, much like Kevin was saying, there are big operational advantages to using EVs on both the operating cost and the maintenance cost side. One of the interesting things that we're starting to see more of that is not a typical use for fleets, especially corporate fleets, is making those vehicles available to employees for non-business uses, or something that we sometimes call fleet share. So basically having a fleet of EVs that your employees use perhaps 9 to 5 or 8 to 4 during the day for a business use as a fleet vehicle, but that employees or sometimes even other groups can use nights and evenings for other uses. You can generate revenue that way. It can be an amenity. So it can be an employee attraction and retention tool. It can be something that also helps with employee resiliency, which I think I'll talk about in a minute. So on this side, one of the interesting things when using car share or fleet share on a corporate campus is that it's very complementary to goals around reducing employee single occupancy vehicle trips and parking demand. We're increasingly seeing call centers, corporate campuses, where they're basically running out of parking, especially as offices have become more efficient in terms of how people use them. And with everything going on with COVID, what we're seeing is a lot of companies talking about a concept around hoteling, where people come in certain days of the week. And so getting people and providing your staff with the opportunity to choose the most environmentally efficient way to get to work is something that we're seeing staff talk about a little bit more. And so when you have the ability to get to your workplace, perhaps on public transit, ideally on public transit, but maybe using a shared shuttle or carpooling or things like that, when you also have shared vehicles on the campus or at the headquarters building, or whatever type of building it is, that incentivizes people to use those alternative methods to get to the workplace, knowing that they have a vehicle available to them if they have to go out to a meeting, if they want to run an errand, if they have to go out to lunch, if they have a sick kid at school. And so what we see is that there's an increased utilization of these shared and public transit ways to get to and from work by providing transit while you're there, or access to a vehicle while you're there. And that can increasingly be not just a car, but could be an electric bike, could be a scooter, could be things like that, depending on how walkable the area is where the building is. And finally, on employee resiliency, this is something that we talk about increasingly with call centers and places with a lot of lower wage employees, especially employees who may be a little bit more paycheck to paycheck. And what we find is that when a car, which tends to be a typical internal combustion car, has an issue, doesn't start in the morning, that employee may struggle to get to work. Maybe they can get there on the first day, but maybe they can't get their car fixed until 3 or 4 days or until their next paycheck. And so having vehicles that are available for uses like this also help with that employee retention and the resiliency of that employee. Very easy to get started. Some of these things are super easy. So if you have a GM vehicle, a Ford vehicle, Ford calls theirs simply Ford Telematics. But most of the vehicle manufacturers have these programs available. So a lot of times it's as easy as going to their corporate or fleet website and signing up. They do tend to be subscription programs, but they're very affordable. GM's OnStar Vehicle Insight starts at $16 a month. So you really get a lot of great insight for a pretty low fee. If you want to do something where we help you with the vehicle and insurance and all those things, basically all you need is a dedicated parking space and, like Jimmy was talking about, a network charger, which we can include in our subscription as well. So these are all things we do. Always very happy to work with whatever suppliers you're currently using, work with ChargePoint, all the other charger manufacturers. Can use basically any EV. Really, we can use any vehicle, but really our strong preference is for EVs. And including, as we're saying, coming soon, so in the springtime, this will include e-bikes and e-scooters. Here's my information, and I'll turn it back to Andrew for Q&A.
Thank you, Michael, and all of our presenters. We do have a couple of questions, so if all of you are available, these are not necessarily for one or any of you. The first one I have for you is replacement of vehicles is typically well planned by fleet managers. What is the expected life of one of these EVs compared to a gas vehicle?
Yeah, I'd say that it is similar to the same type of life. I mean, we've had Nissan come out to give assurances on the amount of miles that their battery would be able to hold up to, and I think they said it was 400,000 miles or some very large number. And then Tesla has done something similar to say that their vehicles can do it. They were running some type of EV fleet between like Las Vegas and San Jose area. So the life expectancy would be very similar to the internal combustion engines, if not a little bit better. But there is a little bit of, I don't want to gloss over the fact that there's a little bit of battery degradation over time, but the motor tends to be like one moving part versus tens of thousands in a internal combustion engine. And then you have your standard, just like, driving components that would wear out, like tires and eventually brake pads, even though they're used very minimally, they still would eventually. I actually had a guy who told me that his just rusted out because they weren't used. So they still do have components that would need to be maintained over time that are similar to a gas car.
Okay. So another question was fleet cars. If you're charging a lot of them at one time, that's a lot of electricity coming into your facility. How how are there ways to manage that? Are there additional costs and issues than just putting up a bunch of just chargers in a row? You know, if you have 100 vehicles, you're drawing a lot of power.
Yeah, and if
Yes.
you guys are fine with that, I'll jump into that one. But I mean, I was actually just recently talking with the city of Pittsburgh, and they have about 30 electric cars, I think, somewhere in that range. And to their point, they've done their past telematics data, and they realized that an average vehicle in their fleet for a light duty vehicle would travel 24 miles a day or 25 miles a day. So for them, that vehicle has 240 miles of range. They really just need to charge every couple of days. So they were using power management to derate the speed of that charge so that, you know, it would charge at a full rate at a longer period of time, so that you could then lower the total amount of energy used all at once. And then potentially you could just rotate like which days they charge if you wanted to do it that way. But there's several techniques you could use in order to reduce your total output at one time, so you don't hit like maybe a demand charge depending on your commercial energy rate that you may be into. So yeah, energy management essentially was the short answer to that one.
Correct.
Okay. So a lot of the conversation today was revolving smaller cars, small size delivery vehicles. Where are we in terms of large trucks that are EV?
So we're seeing testing taking place now. You might have seen some of this on 60 Minutes, for example, where you have large fleets that are experimenting with EVs that are also autonomous. You know, that's going to be coming on stream. I don't think that'll be, you know, we've heard probably mid-decade. It might be a little later. There are trust issues associated with autonomous, but in terms of electric vehicles that are Class 8, I don't know if there's anything that I'm seeing in terms of Class 8s that aren't autonomous. Maybe the rest of the panel are seeing Class 8s that are.
I'm not sure about the as much as the autonomous, but I do have a slide that I didn't present, but I could show now of list of medium and heavy duty vehicles that are electrified, and not including the ones that are coming. But I do have a pretty substantial list of current available market. This is depending if I can figure out how to share my screen on my own.
Yeah,
Not
we're working with a number of
Allison
fleets.
can.
We're also working with a number of fleets in the state on this. So we're working with Pitt, Ohio on Class 6, 7 EV deployments with DHL, Procter & Gamble, 2 men in a truck. We're working with Yellow Cab here, doing one of those Ford Transits as a shuttle bus that Kevin showed earlier. We're working with Bimbo Bakeries on a Motive step van like the one pictured here. City of Columbus on a Class 8 refuse truck. All of those electrified. So that's just in the state of Ohio. Certainly, Nestle just announced some deployments here. Amazon purchases, UPS, FedEx. You know, there's a lot of these medium and vocational heavy duty units now available, as Jimmy's shown here.
Yeah, and here's a list of, I see some of these are in the near future, like the Rivian would be. Workhorse is just about there too, but these are vendors that, I mean, most times in the heavy duty, you're probably planning out ordering your fleet, you know, months or maybe up to a year in advance anyway. So these would be options for that. And then on the bus side of it, I realize it could be potential for people on this call. Here's a list of vendors that are participating in the bus side of it for electric.
All right.
And we can always follow up afterwards if people have specific questions.
Okay, excellent. And I guess the last question would be, and Michael touched on this a little bit, but there are additional costs to owning a fleet of vehicles, one of which is insurance for those cars. Is there cost savings or additional cost in terms of insuring the EVs in comparison to your traditional fleet?
So on the light duty side, I would say we have found that there is not any premium to EVs over regular vehicles.
All right. Well, with that, we are hitting our time. So in order to keep everybody's schedule intact, I will say thank you to all of our speakers, and thank you to all of you who are attending. If you have any additional questions or are ready to get started, please reach out to me and the Greater Cleveland Partnership to get all the details and connect to the resources to make the change. There are many options and opportunities for the funding and implementation of EVs, and GCP can be your guide in accessing those. So thanks again, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Andrew. Be well. Stay safe.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.